Edmonton has recently unveiled plans to incorporate the 15-minute city concept into its urban planning strategy. But could this potentially impact your freedom to move within or around your own city? Joining me today from the lovely Walnut Creek, California is Marc Joffe, a policy analyst from the Cato Institute. Thank you for being with us today, Marc.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
It's great to have you here to chat about something that seems to be alarming people a bit. Can you briefly explain the concept of 15-minute cities to those who might be unfamiliar with it?
Sure. And I actually live in a 15-minute city, so I can tell you it's not all bad. So
Okay.
the basic idea is that urban areas should be designed so that people can get to the things that they want to do, like education, shopping, restaurants, and so forth, uh, with a 15-minute walk or bicycle ride from their home. And so, that's pretty much something that a lot of people like. A lot of people also, I'm sure, in parts of Canada, would rather be away from other amenities and living by themselves. But for many people who live in urban areas, it's attractive to be close to the things that you want to do. So I don't think the concept itself is necessarily bad.
Right. So could you give us maybe a few of the main advantages of the 15-minute city model?
Sure. First of all, it promotes personal health because you're walking or bicycling. Now, of course, with e-bikes and with e-scooters, you get a little bit less exercise. So that could be compromised depending on how that works. Theoretically, the air is cleaner. There's less global warming going on because there are fewer cars driving around generating greenhouse gas emissions. So there are a lot of benefits. I think another one that advocates will quote is the idea that you're just closer to other people, and so you're going to have more interactions with your neighbors.
Right.
I think that one. Uh, from my own personal experience, I see a lot of people on the street. It doesn't necessarily mean I interact with them, so I'm not really quite sure that really follows.
Right. It almost sounds to me like it's bringing back some components of small town living. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I mean historically, going back to the Middle Ages, we lived in small villages, and it definitely was a 15-minute
Hmm.
community. Maybe it was even a 5-minute community because there just wasn't that many things around. So yes, I
It's
think it
true.
does harken back to an earlier time.
Well, and I was also thinking of how towns used to have centers, maybe a park or a pavilion. Maybe my wife and I just watch too much Gilmore Girls, but that's kind of the idea of what I think of when you mention 15-minute cities. Luke's got to have a diner close to the center pavilion, but are there some disadvantages maybe with implementing 15-minute cities?
Well, yeah, I think it depends on how it's implemented. So, yeah, to the extent that we're relaxing zoning laws to require more mixed use type of development, some people are going to object to that, but I personally wouldn't. The problem becomes when it gets more coercive than that. So, the celebrated case happened in Oxford, England, last year, where they came up with the idea that the whole city was going to be divided up into a series of 15-minute communities, and to enforce that, they were going to limit the number of times you could drive from one part of Oxford to the other, and if you drove above a certain number of times, you would have to pay a fine. And so that begins to, get more big brothery, top down, control. And I think that really gets a lot of people worried. And I think that's a legitimate thing to worry about.
Yeah, people don't want to be fenced in, and fear is definitely a factor in a lot of people's lives. Sounds like this idea could have either the utopian plan or maybe dystopian. But I wanted to ask you, um, relaxing zoning laws and having mixed use buildings, Actually sounds like a good thing for urban environments. Could you talk a little bit about the advantages of that?
Sure. Well, let's start with the disadvantages, since I'm a bit of a pessimistic person. So let's start with the downside. Because actually, a lot of my neighbors in Northern California and throughout the state who generally agree with my kind of small government approach really, really, really hate the idea of the state of California telling local communities to drop their zoning laws. And there's a big celebration here, and I don't know if this is something that you see in Canada so much. There's a big celebration of the idea of the community of single-family homes, where everyone's has a lawn, they have a place for their kids to play, and so forth. And that might not be a 15-minute community because it may be that there's just so much residential that that shopping is just more than a 15-minute walk or bicycle ride away. So, a lot of people like that type of lifestyle, and I don't want to necessarily denigrate it. I think that in a market environment, we'll have choices. We'll have people who will be able to live in communities like that, and we'll have people like me who want to live in apartments and be able to walk to everything. So I think that as long as it's not coercive and as long as there's a variety of options available, it all should be okay. Now, as far as the advantages are concerned, again, thinking about more of a dense urban area like San Francisco or New York, where I'm originally from, it used to be that there'd be a, a grocery store on the corner, a barber shop, other kinds of businesses. And then it started to become, with zoning coming in, starting I think more in the 1920s, that kind of mixed use was really denigrated, and the idea was we need to have like a sharp separation between where people live and where people do their business. And I think some of that was inspired by the fact that there are sometimes negative externalities, bad things that come out of businesses like noises, smells, and that sort of thing. And I think a lot of that has gone away. So maybe in the old days you'd be butchering animals live, and there'd be blood and odors and so forth. You don't really see that anymore. It's mostly packaged goods in a marketplace. So I think some of that might have had some legitimate foundation at the beginning. I don't think it really applies now, and I think there are other ways of protecting residents from externalities other than a really harsh regime of zoning. So yes, I think mixed use is a great thing, and I hope more cities embrace it.
Yeah, and definitely the smaller government and bureaucracy would be great too. I would like to ask you about across the pond, so to speak. And are there examples from Europe of other than Oxford that have been implementing the 15-minute city concept?
Yes,
Yeah,
Paris,
tell me.
Paris.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Paris has really been doubling down on it. During COVID, they put in a lot more bike lanes, again,
Okay.
which are fine. Although the disadvantage there is that often reduces the amount of available parking.
Hmm.
I'm not close enough to the situation to know whether it's creating problems and that people just don't have a place to park. I mean, you can substitute curbside parking with multi-level parking structures, and I don't think it's too much to ask people to pay 1 or 2 euros or 2 or 3 Canadian dollars
Hmm.
to park. But if you just eliminate parking and you don't replace it, and then people are driving around the block constantly, generating
Yeah.
more greenhouse gas emissions, that's counterproductive. So bike lanes, can be a good thing as long as they're thoroughly utilized and as long as they don't reduce parking to below minimum acceptable level. Then on the downside, they've started to do car-free Sundays, which is something that we see in San Francisco a lot. I just think that creates a lot of unnecessary inconvenience. I mean, it's sort of nice. You get a nice picture of everybody walking along the River Seine or whatever. Where in San Francisco here, it's in the major park that we have. They close off a lot of the roads in the park. I think it makes everyone feel good. Well, it makes people on one side of the debate feel good, and I think it just creates a lot of inconvenience for others. And it's probably very bad for business because some people, maybe 30 minutes away or 45 minutes away and would like to patronize businesses and now can't because they don't have that driving option on Sunday.
That's right. So, have there been maybe some specific responses that you've heard from the Paris transformation over to 15-minute cities?
I have not seen a lot of criticism of it, but I haven't looked too carefully. So I'm sure there are people who don't like it. There seems to be a lot of populism in France right now, a lot of people objecting to various government edicts. I wouldn't be surprised if that was among them.
Right. Now, considering existing infrastructure and also, let's say, the habits of people who are used to vehicle transportation and other things like that, do you see this as being applicable the world over with a planning model like this?
Well, another case of a city trying this is Melbourne, Australia. So that shows another continent.
Yep.
They're doing 20-minute neighborhoods, so it's a little bit of a variant. Australia
Sure.
is a pretty low density country in general, so I don't know, how much of it can apply there. Well, and then you've got India and China, which are just incredibly dense countries, and you'd almost imagine that a lot of the people living there live in something like a 15-minute city already. A lot of people there don't have cars.
Yeah.
So they really have to be able to walk to everything.
That's right. Now, one of the issues that we have here in southern Alberta is the rural landscape and the bedroom communities that are around us. Do you think there's a provision or maybe planning with these 15-minute cities to impact that urban-rural connection, or maybe it's a divide?
I think the people who advocate 15-minute cities want to see us building up rather than building out. And so that actually is much more consistent with the idea of preserving the rural spaces. Others, and I would tend to put myself in this camp, would be for some development of rural areas if population pressure is what it is. Now, I mean, the last time I looked at Alberta's demographics, it wasn't like there was a huge increase in population going on. I don't know if that's changed. So I'm not really sure that there's really that much need to develop new areas.
Do you think that there's maybe a role that technology plays in developing, or let's say extrapolating out, this idea of the 15-minute city?
That's really a great question because during COVID, I thought a lot about technology displacing our need to go into the office and do other in-person activities, and I think some of that didn't really pan out. One idea that I wrote about was, the idea that we would all get these, Meta branded virtual reality goggles or whatever
That's right.
devices, and we'd be having these Zoom style
Yes.
meetings, except we would have avatars and everything would be in 3D,
Yeah,
and it would
that's right.
feel more like an office. And to my great surprise, because they invested an enormous amount of money in that,
Yeah.
that did not catch on. That's really been a total failure. So it does seem that people want to physically be with people.
Yeah. That's
So
right.
I don't know how much technology really does. I mean, although there's still definitely a lot of technology displacement going on. I mean, I'm talking to you from
Yeah.
my home,
That's right.
and a lot of shopping trips that I do now are obviated by simply going onto Amazon
Absolutely.
or some other online vendor, and the box shows up in my house a day or two later.
Yeah.
So there are definitely, technology reduces our need to drive places.
Right.
It's definitely the case.
Yeah. Now, one other thought that I had, the largest city near us is Calgary, Alberta, and one of the hot topics there has been expanding light rapid rail transit. And it seems to me that people realize that that is a hot button topic. They don't get large volumes of ridership. So perhaps 15-minute cities is actually a more cost-effective and workable solution for larger centers. Would you agree with that, or what would your take be?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts about that. First of all, some 15-minute city advocates import transit. So we talked about walking, biking, or scootering. Some of them will say walking, biking, scootering, or using transit. So, that is generally part of the just more of an anti-car philosophy. What can you do to replace car trips? I've not looked at light rail in Canada. I've looked at a lot of light rail systems in the United States, and they have the same problem that you just mentioned, the lack of ridership. And at least in the U.S., I think this is less of a problem in Canada, but in the U.S., we have a huge problem with high costs. So, you could have systems going in at, 50 million, 100 million, $200 million a mile. Uh, and then, when it gets into heavy rail, we have a couple of systems, one in New York and one in San Francisco, or I should say, sorry, San Jose, that are looking at over $1 billion to $2 billion. This is U.S. dollars, right, per mile. And at least in the case of San Jose system, the ridership is going to be very limited. So, it's not really a cost-effective use of taxpayer money to be building these systems. I know one thing that you've done in Canada that's been superior to what we have in most of the United States, now with one exception, is embracing driverless transit vehicles. So I know the Vancouver system, for example, is driverless. We have the first one now in the States, but it's in Hawaii where it's really not needed, but there's a driverless system there. If Calgary is thinking about that, at least it's going to reduce the operating cost of it.
Yeah. Well, hey, even the artificial intelligence wants to be in Hawaii. You got to hand it to those driverless buses or trains. Mark, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for joining us to chat about 15-minute cities.
Thanks for having me, Michael, anytime.